Welcome to episode 117 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by 17 Laws Guy. It's February 25, 1912. We're in Barcelona, not at the Camp Nou, not even at Les Corts, but on the old Camp de la Industria, a tight little ground squeezed into the city like a back alley secret. And today, a 15-year-old walks into FC Barcelona's first team and does the most early football thing imaginable. He doesn't just debut, he detonates. 3 goals, 3 records, and the beginning of a career that will sit quietly under a century of dust until one man named Lionel Messi finally catches him. His name is Paulino Alcántara, and if you never heard of him, that's the point of today's story. Because when we talk about the game's GOATs, we usually start with the age of television. Before Messi, there was Cristiano. Before Cristiano, there was Ronaldo. Before Ronaldo, there was Maradona. And before Maradona, Pelé, and before Pelé, Di Stefano. But football didn't begin in 1950, and superstardom didn't begin with satellite TV. In the 1910s and 20s, football already had icons, men whose names traveled through newspapers, shipping routes, and conversations in cafes, men whose reputations were built on grainy match reports and unstoppable myth-making. Paulino Alcántara is one of the most important of them all, and one of the easiest to lose to time, because his world didn't yet have the machines that turned players into global brands. But how did we get here? Barcelona in 1912 is still a young club. There's no La Liga, not even close. Spain's league won't arrive until the end of the 1920s. The competitive heartbeat is regional, the Campeonato de Catalunya, and then a cup competition that feels like a national summit meeting, the Copa del Rey. The club itself is an experiment, a Catalan institution with international DNA, built by Joan Gamper and shaped by the city's open windows to Europe. And into that setting arrives a teenager who is, in a way, a footballer from the future, because he represents something football will eventually become, truly global. Alcántara is born in the Philippines, Iloilo, then still a part of Spain's world. As a boy, he moves to Barcelona. He grows up in the city, but his origin story is not the typical European pathway of the time. He plays for a local side called FC Galeno, a team linked to medical students, and he's good enough that people start whispering. He's slight, almost fragile looking, but the ball doesn't care what you look like. And Joan Gamper notices. That's the hint. The founder of Barcelona spots a teenager from the edge of the Spanish world and brings him into the heart of the club, which takes us to the event. February 25, 1912, Barcelona versus Català, one of the old local rivals. And Barcelona's first team is still so early in its evolution that it doesn't even have the modern sense of a coach as a central figure. But it does have this, a 15-year-old debutant. Alcántara steps onto the pitch and scores a hat-trick. Barcelona win 9-0, and in one afternoon, he writes himself into the club's record book in permanent ink. Youngest player, youngest goal scorer, and the youngest to score a hat-trick in a match. It's a sort of debut that forces you to recalibrate the room. Because when a kid does that, you don't call it potential, you call it inevitability. And Alcántara doesn't just have a moment, he becomes an era. Over the next decade and a half, he scores goals the way some players breathe, regularly, violently, and without apology. His nickname tells you what you need to know, El Rompe Redes, the Netbreaker. In an age when goal nets were less standardized, less reinforced, and sometimes barely more than a rope and optimism, Alcántara hits the ball hard enough that people swear he tore through the net itself. And whether every detail survives as fact or folklore, the myth is revealing. When a player earns that nickname, it's because crowds have seen something they can't easily explain. He becomes Barcelona's first true scoring superstar, the original forward, who makes the club feel larger than its surroundings. And then the story turns outward, because Alcántara doesn't belong to only one football identity. He plays for 3 national teams, which sounds impossible in modern football, but in the early 20th century, football nationality is a looser, stranger thing. He plays for Catalonia, because regional representative football matters deeply in Spain at the time. He plays for the Philippines, because the Far Eastern Championship games exist, and because the game is already spreading through colonial routes and new association. And then he plays for Spain, but only briefly, because international football is still sporadic, messy, and hostage to travel, calendars, and real life. And here's how scarce it is. Alcántara is selected for Spain's squad for the 1920 Olympics. Spain's first great international stage, but he stays home to sit his final medical exams. That detail matters because it tells you what football still is at this point, not yet the thing that automatically outranks everything else. A year later, when Spain hosts Belgium at San Mamés, Alcántara finally appears, and he scores both goals in a 2-0 win. He's the captain, he's the finisher, and for a moment, Spain's early national team has a striker who looks like he's going to rewrite the idea of what a forward can be. But his international window remains small, not because he lacks quality, but because the world is not yet built to showcase him. So where does his greatness actually land? It lands in Barcelona's trophy years, the club's first golden age. In the 1920s, Barcelona becomes a magnet for legends, Samitier, Zamora, and others who helped push the club into a new cultural weight class. And Alcántara is right at the center of it, the forward who turns dominance into numbers. And by the time he steps away, Barcelona's own records credit him with a goal total that is staggering even by modern standards: 395 goals in 399 appearances. And for generations, he stands as the club's benchmark, the all-time scoring king, the measuring stick, the before in every before and after conversation. And then comes the so what, because the point of Alcántara is not just that he scored goals. It is that his story exposes how we remember football. In the era of Messi and Cristiano, GOAT arguments are global, quantified, televised, clipped, streamed, and monetized. But Alcántara's era is remembered through fragments, match reports, club archives, and stories passed down like heirlooms. So when we ask, how revered was he? The answer is, revered enough that Barcelona never stopped treating him like a foundational legend, the club's first true star forward. Revered enough that a century later, his name still sits in the club's official story as the original scoring titan. And when we ask, how is he remembered today? The answer is unevenly, which is almost the definition of early greatness. In Barcelona, he's part of the club's mythology. In Spain, he's an early national team hero. And in the Philippines, he's a rediscovered figure, proof that football history in Asia and Oceania did not begin recently, and that global football has deeper roots than we usually admit. And if this is making you think of the paradox we discussed in episode 48, the strange business of crowning individuals in a team sport, that's not an accident. Alcántara lived before the Ballon d'Or, before global awards, before the marketing industry that turned every individual greatness into an economy. And yet, his era still produced something that looks very familiar, the argument that one player can sit above the rest, not because he wins alone, but because he bends reality often enough that everyone has to adjust their expectations. That's what a GOAT is, in any era, the player who forces the sport to update itself around him. And Alcántara did that, quietly, early, and so long ago that most of the world forgot to keep watching. So here are the 3 things to take away from February 25, 1912. First, football's first GOATs didn't lack greatness, they lacked bandwidth. The world simply didn't have the technology to carry them everywhere. And second, Alcántara is a reminder that global football didn't begin with the Champions League. A player born in the Philippines became Barcelona's original scoring legend over 100 years ago. And third, records are memory machines. Alcántara's goals didn't just win matches, they built a century-long reference point until the modern era finally produced someone who could chase him down. On this day in 1912, a 15-year-old named Paulino Alcántara debuted for Barcelona, set 3 records in one afternoon, and became a scoring legacy so immense that it took more than 100 years for the club to find a man who could finally pass him. That's all for episode 117 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by 17 Lost Guy. If you enjoy OTD, please follow it, rate, and share the show. It's the simplest way to help this project grow. And if you have a story, a correction, or a rabbit hole you want me to chase, email me at otd@17lawsguy.com. Tomorrow, episode 118, February 26, 2010. Portsmouth enter administration, and the Premier League learns what going bust really looks like, what administration actually means, how it happens, and why Pompey became the warning label for modern football finance. See you then.